There are some sections of Scripture, some chapters, that the content of them is so obvious and so well known that we give them names. The Lord is my shepherd. Psalm 23. The love chapter. 1 Corinthians 13. The faith chapter. Hebrews 11. Now, although these characterizations are generally accurate, there's often a context that's really important for us to notice. And sometimes that context is masked by the titles that we give to these sections, maybe even the headers at the beginning of those chapters, and by the chapter divisions. For example, in 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter is not essentially about love alone. It's about exercising love when we use spiritual gifts. The focus, the topic is spiritual gifts, and love is how we're to exercise those spiritual gifts. And likewise, here in Hebrews 11, if you want to turn there with me, it's not an isolated discussion about faith, but it provides examples of faith and an explanation of the type of faith that endures. There are good reasons we call Hebrews 11 the faith chapter. If you were to count them, at least in my translation, I use the New American Standard here, there are 26 times that the word faith occurs. And so, rightly so, we call it the faith chapter as it describes the people of faith. But really, when you look at Hebrews 11, it's like a thick layer of jelly between two pieces of bread. There's a sandwich here. And chapter 11 is just the jelly. There's a piece of bread in chapter 10, and there's a piece of bread in chapter 12, and chapter 11 is just that jelly that is in this context. To look just at chapter 11 without looking at the context would be like having a jelly sandwich with just jelly and no jam. It's kind of weird, right? So before we look at the jam between the two pieces of bread, we need to look at the bread. We need to set the bread on the plate. And so if we go back to the last verse of chapter 10, it says this: "So we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but we are of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul." Now faith. And so you see that in the last verse in chapter 10 is talking about faith that we hold on to preserve our souls. It's talking about our salvation. We're not of those who shrink back. And then he goes on to chapter 11 to describe that faith. Salvation, the preservation of our souls, is a result of having a faith that does not shrink away, that does not shrink back. God is not pleased, it says in chapter 10 here, verse 38, "If he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him." And those who shrink away, God is not pleased with him, but we'll see that those who have faith, God is pleased with them. And so this verse summarizes the discussion. Verse 39 here in chapter 10 summarizes the discussion about an enduring faith. Look at verse 36. You need to have endurance. Endurance is that continuous effort in the face of challenges and difficulty. You don't need endurance if it's a cakewalk, if it's easy. You need endurance, though, if it's hard. And these people were facing hard things regarding their faith. Verse 35, do not throw away your confidence. Don't throw it away. It has great reward. Faith has great reward. Don't throw that away. And this focus on steadfastness, enduring faith, is the second command we have up earlier in the chapter. There's 3 commands. Verse 22, let us draw near with a sincere heart. Verse 23, let's hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. Verse 24, let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. And so there's those 3 commands. They're related together. The second of those commands is let us hold fast the confidence of our hope. And so the second half of Hebrews 10 is explaining the alternative. If we don't hold fast, if we fall away, if we continue to willfully sin, there's only the expectation of judgment. We have need of endurance. Don't throw away your confidence. It has great reward. And so the last half of chapter 10 is focusing on holding fast to faith in Jesus and the benefits that he provides, and that God is pleased with that faith. My righteous one, he says, will live by faith. And so there's a lead up here of holding fast to faith as we approach chapter 11. Now flip over to chapter 12. Let's read the first 3 verses here. So in chapter 11, there's all of these people who walked by faith. Chapter 12 describes them as witnesses, and it says there's a whole cloud of witnesses. It's like you're in a big heavy fog, and all of these witnesses are around you. You're in the middle of them. He says, therefore, since we have a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, people who have lived by faith, let us also, like them, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance, holding fast our faith, endurance, the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. Now we'll come to chapter 12 next week, but it's important for us to understand that chapter 11 is this jam in the middle of the sandwich. On the one hand, there has hold fast your faith. These are all an explanation of faith. And then after that, let us run with endurance the race that's set before us. Let us run with faith. And we'll just a little preview here that the focus is not on the cloud of witnesses. We're surrounded by all of these people who walked by faith and did these great things by faith, but our focus is not to be on them. Our focus is to be on Jesus. Have you ever heard somebody say, well, I had a bad experience at church, so I don't go anymore? I've heard a lot of people say that. Their focus is not on Jesus. God will never fail you. People will fail you. If I haven't failed you yet, I will. I probably failed you many times already. I'm imperfect. If Canaan Church hasn't failed you, there will be times it will. But if you're focusing on Jesus, you will hold fast the confession of your faith. And if you remember those 3 commands, let us draw near to God. Let us hold fast confession of our faith. Let us consider how to stimulate one another, not forsaking our assembling together. We have forsake our assembling together, and we fail to hold fast to our faith when we're not looking at Jesus. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself there. But the bread of our jam sandwich is that faith that produces salvation is a faith that endures. And so when we come to chapter 11, we can ask, what is this faith of endurance that results in salvation? The first aspect of this faith we should notice is that it's a faith that's not simply knowledge. It's not simply understanding. It's a faith that is a deep-seated belief that controls what a person does. And so the first aspect of faith is faith produces actions. Now, there's 40 chapters here in chapter 11. I'm not going to read it all. I'm not going to cover everything. But we want to understand what this jam is in the middle of these pieces of bread. This faith that endures. How did these people endure? What does their faith look like? So of the 26 times that the word faith occurs here in Hebrews 11, 18 of those 26 times, the word faith is found in this little phrase, by faith. By faith. There are people, individuals, many of them are mentioned by name, some of them are mentioned by what they did, but for each one of them, what it's saying is these people had faith. And by the way, some of these people that are mentioned are kind of imperfect, like you and me. But they had faith, and their faith produced something in their life. Because they believed God, they did something. And as I said, some of them are mentioned by name, and those names are individuals in the Old Testament, and others are mentioned by their actions. It talks about somebody who closed the mouth of lions. Well, you can guess who that is, right? Daniel, at least, is one person we know who did that. And these people who acted on their faith, they provide a witness or testimony about what faith is and what faith looks like and the result of their faith. There's a lot of them, and they're described as this cloud of witnesses who testify to us about faith. And these witnesses, we are told, they did things by faith. For example, in verse 4, by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain. Now, there's a lot we don't know about Cain and Abel. There's a lot we don't know about their sacrifices. And we know their names because that was the first murder, the first recorded death in the Bible. And that Cain killed his brother. But what we see here is we get insight is that Cain apparently did not act in faith. He brought a sacrifice, but it wasn't in faith. And Abel brought a sacrifice that was in faith. In other words, they understood and knew some things about sacrifices that we don't know, and he acted in faith. He brought a better sacrifice than Cain. It says, and because of that he obtained a testimony that he was righteous, that God testified or witnessed about his gifts, and as a result of that, he is a witness for us. He still speaks, even though he's dead. As Brad read in the Living Bible, long dead, right? But he's still speaking. He's still a witness of faith in that he offered a sacrifice. Look at verse 7. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not seen, in reverence, what did Noah do? By faith, Noah prepared an ark for the salvation of his household. Noah had faith and he built an ark. He did something. By faith, verse 8, Abraham went to the place that God told him. Abraham's quite an amazing guy. God told him to go somewhere, and he went somewhere. He didn't know where he was going. He took his wife, Sarah. Hey, Sarah, we're moving. Where? I don't know. When? I don't know. What are we going to do when we get there? I don't know. God said to move. Like, you can kind of read between the lines some of the dynamics there, and they seem a bit challenging at times. By faith, Abraham went to the place God told him, not knowing where he was going. He trusted God. In verse 17, by faith, Abraham offered his son. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but God told him to offer his son, and tells us that Abraham understood that his son was going to be a great nation, and he had to live in order to fulfill God's promise. God was faithful. God would fulfill that promise. That promise had to be fulfilled through his son. So we have lots of questions about that, but the point here is that Abraham trusted God to fulfill his promise and did what God said even when it was beyond understanding or reason. And Abraham had some experience in trusting God, because his son, who he was offering, was a miraculous son. He had been born as a result of God's promises by God's power, in defiance of everything nature or science or human reason would suggest. In verse 23, by faith, Moses refused to enjoy the life as Egyptian royalty. He chose to identify with the people of Israel who were slaves, instead of to enjoy the privilege he had as one who had been adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. Verse 29, by faith Israel passed through the Red Sea. And so we have kind of this machine gun, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith. And as you look and read these things, much of what it says is, by faith, this person did this. This person did this. This person did this. So faith, biblical faith, produces action. These acts of faith are responses to God's truth, to things God said or things that were known about God. It's not just some random actions because you believe it. Biblical faith is knowing what God says and embracing that as true and acting upon it. It's the acting upon the faith that perfects the faith. So faith begins when we know the truth. And then we're like, yeah, I agree with that. And then we act upon it. You see, you can know the truth and not actually believe the truth. You can believe the truth and not act upon it. There's this third component of faith, this component of trust that causes you to act upon it. So most of you drove here today. Maybe Sherry walked. Did you guys walk? Yeah, all right. But the rest of us drove here, and we got in this big metal vehicle, or plastic as it is today, and we headed down the road at 30, 40, 50, maybe 60, or some of you even faster, down the highway, trusting, having faith that if you needed to, if a deer ran in front of you, you could step on the brake and it would slow you down and stop you. That's faith. None of you saw the hydraulic fluid in there, right? You didn't see that. You just trusted. Well, when we know the truth of God, then we act upon that truth. That is the perfection of faith, the completion of faith. And so in James, it talks about Abraham's faith was perfected, completed, matured, came to fullness when he offered Isaac. It's kind of like the corn in my garden. I planted the seeds, but the corn is not yet complete. Mostly. Actually, we had 2 ears yesterday. But the seed sprouted and the plants grew, and now there's tall stalks with ears forming and tassels present, but most of it is not yet complete. And see, faith is like that. There's the seeds of faith that as we learn the truth of God and then it grows in our lives and we agree with the truth of God, and then when we act upon it, when it comes to maturity, then it controls our lives. And so finally faith is mature and it's completed when we act upon it. And that's what he's saying here, that God is pleased by faith, and it's a type of faith that's based on the truth that we put into actions in our lives. Let's consider Noah for a minute. He's one of the ones that are mentioned here. Noah was told by God there's going to be a flood. Flood the whole world and prepare an ark to save you and your family. Now, Noah at that point, he knew what God said. But that wasn't faith. Knowing what God said was not faith. He could have actually believed what God said, went around and told it, hey, God said this. God said this. God said this. But his faith was not complete until he built the ark. And it was the completion of his faith that resulted in the salvation of his family. If he did not build the ark, no matter how much he proclaimed it, you know, a lot of people in the world say, I believe in Jesus, I'm a Christian, and make all of these claims verbally, but they don't hold fast to their faith. They don't consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. They forsake the assembling together. They don't endure. It's common for people to know the truth of God, but not act on it. And James, the book of James, it emphasizes that type of faith, a faith without actions, a faith without works, is not saving faith. It is a dead faith. It's a type of faith, but it's not saving faith. And so if our faith is in something other than Jesus, you can have very strong faith in something other than Jesus, and that faith will not save you. Or you can have a faith in your head, you can believe something and believe it sincerely, but if you don't act on it, it's not genuine faith. And so the faith of this great cloud of witnesses includes action. That's the first aspect of this faith that is unto the preserving of the soul. The second aspect of true faith is that faith surpasses sight. Faith surpasses sight. It goes beyond what we can see. Now, look at verse 1 here in Hebrews 11. Now, faith. You know, this is one of those places that you might want to take a pencil and just mark out your chapter division. Because at the end, verse 39, it says, we are of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the confidence of things not seen. Now, if you were following along with Pastor Brad and looking at your Bible, it's like, wait a minute, these are different words. And then if I just read it, you might say, hey, wait a minute, these are different words. There's different words that are used here and expressed in our translations in different ways. For example, listen here. The King James Version says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. A translation called the Legacy Standard Bible says faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. My Bible I'm using here says faith is the certainty of things hoped for, the proof of things not seen. The NIV says faith is the confidence in what we hope for, the assurance about what we do not see. And so there's these different words. They're somewhat synonymous, a little bit different. But the point here, and that's what you take away from this, don't get confused by these different words, faith is about what we hope for. That which we anticipate in the future, when we have confidence about because God has said it. Hope is this faith projected in the future. And so there's something coming in the future, and God has told us about the future. And when we believe that, faith is this assurance. How many of you have seen the future? How many of you have seen the past more than 100 years ago? We haven't seen any of those things. How many of you have seen an atom? There's lots of things that we don't see. How many of you have seen an electron? Right? So, as we look at this verse here, the words vary, but the point is clear. We have hope, a faith about the future. Confidence, proof, assurance. And the object of our faith is something that we don't see. The conviction of things not seen. So I suppose if you're from Missouri, right, it's supposed to be the show me state. If you can't show me, I'm not going to believe it. Well, they got a problem, because faith is confidence, assurance, to the point that you act on it, even though you don't see it. Noah built an ark. What a project, right? They built a supposed duplicate of it back in Ohio, Kentucky, right? Mary and I plan perhaps someday to go see it. But it's huge. And, you know, they had sawmills and lumber mills and forklifts and hydraulics, and Noah didn't have any of that, I don't think. Maybe he did, and we didn't know it. And he built an ark. Why? Because God said that he was going to flood the earth, and he believed it. He'd never seen the earth flood before. He maybe never even seen it rain. Some people don't think it rained before the flood. I'm not sure. Mary's sure. I'm not. One of those things we disagree about or don't agree about. But the point is that Noah built an ark, and he built it based on what God said, not something he had experienced or seen or could prove. Look at verse 3. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared, or the ages were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen is not made out of things that are visible. We believe it. By faith. Because, why? Because God says it. You cannot see the past, but we can believe things about the past. And in the case of creation, we cannot see how the world was created. but we have the testimony of God. God was there when it was created, and he says this is how it was done. And we either trust God or we don't trust God. We cannot reproduce, make the creation happen again. We can see how the creation works now, which apparently is quite different than how it was created, because everything that we see now arises from something that is visible, something that we can see. And so faith is believing what God says about creation, something we've not seen. Faith is believing that God created what is visible out of what cannot be seen. Prove it. You can't prove it. God says it. Now, we can also note that those who deny that God exists, those who deny that God created the world, and they offer some alternative theory about the origins of the world, they haven't seen how that happened either. And so they have a faith in something. It's not a faith in God, it's a faith in men, in men's discoveries, in men's assumptions, but it's a faith in things that are not seen. Our faith is faith in God and faith in the truth about God, and that faith, aspect of that faith is that things are not seen. Now, it doesn't mean that faith is contrary to science. God's truth is not contrary to science. True science is discovering how things work and how things are made. But when things go beyond evidence to interpretation of evidence, and the assumption is that God doesn't exist, then it excludes faith by definition, because faith is in those things that are not seen. Look at verse 6. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. For the one who comes to God must believe that he is. How many of you have seen God? It says in the Bible that no man has seen God. Now they've seen representations of God and manifestations of God, and we can look at creation and see God's fingerprints, so to speak. But as far as seeing God, no man has seen God. Ezekiel had visions of God, and they were really weird. And in the book of Revelation, but no man has seen God. And so our faith in God, by definition, is in something not seen. It is by faith we believe that those who are pleasing to God will be rewarded by him. Now we have examples, and we find those examples here. And so we live in a world that asserts if you cannot see it, if you cannot touch it, if you cannot scientifically reproduce it, then it's not true. And that, of course, excludes faith. Let's look at verse 13. And so it speaks about these different individuals. Verse 13 says, all of these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them, and having welcomed them from a distance, having confessed they were strangers and exiles on the earth. And so they had faith that gave them vision, not visions, but they were looking, we talk about looking to Jesus. Well, what does that mean? Are we seeing Jesus? Are we looking at a cross? Are we looking at an image? No, we're seeing the promises of God in our heart and in our mind. We are embracing those and holding on to those promises. So faith, then, by definition, is having such a confidence in something that cannot be seen that we act upon what we believe. Now, thirdly, true faith pleases God and it results in earthly and eternal blessings. Verse 6 says, by faith we believe that God is the rewarder of those who seek him. God is pleased with faith. Absent faith, and the implication is having faith, you please God. Absent faith, you displease God. Again, faith is not faith in faith. Faith is not faith in this water bottle. Faith is not faith in something in general. Faith is specifically faith in God and faith in the truth about God. So faith pleases God, and pleasing God results in God rewarding those who have faith. The Israelites, they practiced idolatry, and they did it by faith. They had faith in the idols as a substitute of God, and what did God do to them? And when Eve ate the fruit, she exercised faith. She believed what the serpent had said, and her faith led to her actions, but it was a faith based on a lie, and it wasn't pleasing to God. However, for those who have faith in God and act on that faith, it tells us here that they gained God's approval, and they gained a testimony from God. Look at verse 2. For by it, that is by faith, the men of old gained approval or gained a testimony. And so God said to Abraham, when he believed in him, that it says that God imparted his faith, his believing, as righteousness. He gave him the righteousness of Jesus in anticipation of Jesus' death. Abraham was saved by faith. His sins were forgiven because he had faith. By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, and God attested to his righteousness. Likewise, verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and because he was not found, because God took him up, for he obtained a witness that before his being taken up he was pleasing to God. I don't know how all this works. Other than, I don't know how Enoch was taken up. I don't know how he knew he was righteous or how God testified he was righteous, but we know God did because it says so here. And we believe it because God said that. At the end of chapter 11, we find this summary statement regarding those who acted in faith. And there's a whole list of things people did. And verse 39 says, all of these having gained approval or having literally obtained a testimony through their faith. Through their faith. God said, these people are pleasing to me because of their faith. And so God is a rewarder of those who seek him in faith. This path of faith is not always easy, though. The faith does not waver because it reaches the very depth of our being. True faith is a faith that endures. And this is the fourth aspect of true faith. Faith does not change when tested or challenged. So there's a difference between opinions and preferences and true belief. Some of my grandchildren, when they're offered food choices they don't like, they've been taught to say, that is not my preference. Instead of saying, I don't want that. Right? That's not my preference. But it's not a matter of faith for them. We received a gift yesterday, a surprise. A box came in the mail. I had no idea who it was from. It had candy dates in it. they're not my preference. There was a wood customer that I cut wood for a long time, and they sent me a gift. It was really nice of them, but it wasn't my preference. But I could eat. I don't have a conviction against it, but if somebody believed it was sinful to eat dates, they wouldn't eat them no matter what. No, Mary likes them, okay, so the person who has faith about something, it's a deep conviction. It's not an opinion or a preference. It's not optional. If it's optional, then it's just a matter of cost-benefit ratio, right? If I was starving, I would eat dates happily, right? But the writer of Hebrews here, he's writing to people who are facing challenges, big challenges. And he's telling them that true faith does not turn away from the truth no matter how great the challenges are. We read in chapter 10 that some of them had been imprisoned, some of them had suffered, some of them had their properties possessed by the government because they had faith or expressed faith in Jesus, and now they were going to turn away. They were going to throw away their confidence. They weren't going to endure because the cost was too high. And so these cloud of witnesses recorded here, they're people who acted in faith in the face of significant challenges. And that's part of the reason he has this here, this jam between these two pieces of bread, that's endurance and looking to Jesus and don't throw it away. Here are all these people who lived by faith. They acted on what they believed. They continued, and God is faithful. Take Noah, for example. Noah lived out his faith. Seems like it took him about 100 years to build the ark. He was 500 years old when he's mentioned at the end of chapter 5 and chapter 6. When he gets off of the ark, he's 600 years older. When he gets on the ark, I guess it is. He was on the ark for a year. So 100 years, probably, roughly, building an ark. And this is how the people of his time are described. It says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of their heart were only evil continually. It wasn't a pleasant environment. And yet Noah had such faith in God. He was a righteous man in the midst of this, and it had to be hard. And it was costly. I don't know, who funded this project, right? Where did he get the resources? Abraham, he had the promises of God, and he saw no earthly way for them to come to pass. But he believed God, and it was counted him as righteousness, and he waited for decades. Not just a few days. Sometimes we face this struggle, and I'm going to trust God in this, and we're like, we wither away as the days and months and weeks go by. But it was decades. And then think of Moses. It mentions Moses here. Moses' challenges stretched at least for the last 80 years of his life. The last 40 of which he was an unpopular leader. If you took a poll, I think his approval rating would have been close to 0 oftentimes. And he's leading around, obeying God, having faith in God, this group of ungrateful, antagonistic, and unbelieving people. Not just for a month. Not for 4 years, 40 years in the wilderness. Daniel was taken into captivity. I mentioned Daniel is probably referenced here about closing the mouth of lions. He was taken into captivity and he was a prisoner of war as a young man. Probably a young teenager. He served in the government of pagan nations. You know, some of us work in environments that are a bit hostile to Christian faith. Well, Daniel was in the government of Babylon. And then the Medes and Persians, and they were idolaters, but he was faithful to God. They all face challenges, but they continue to hold fast their faith, at least in these examples. You know, it's like the disciples answered at the time when many people stopped following Jesus because of the things Jesus was teaching, and Jesus asked him, you do not want to leave also, do you? And Simon Peter answered, he says, Lord, to whom would we go? Who would we go? You have words of eternal life, and we have already believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. You're it. Where would we go? We don't have any place else to go. You see, difficulties and trials and tests of our faith simply prove whether our faith is genuine or not. Our Constitution has been described as a tube of toothpaste. What's in the tube is what's in the tube. But when the trial comes and pressure is applied to our life, what is on the inside comes out. And if it's good, it's good. And if it's bad, it's bad. And if the bad stuff is coming out when you face trials, well, that's what's on the inside. Okay? The trials don't change us on the inside. They show what's on the inside. And then they do change us on the inside eventually too. And so if our faith is real, then our faith will stand when the trials come. It doesn't mean there won't be struggles and challenges and even doubts. But true faith is not based on sight, but it's based on God. It's based on what God has said. True faith has a reward for the actions that are taken, and we see in some of these examples that they experience earthly rewards as well as eternal ones. True faith patiently waits for what has been promised through the thick or thin. Prosperity and lack, ease and challenges. So no matter what we face in life, God is faithful. The truth of God doesn't change with our circumstances. The faithfulness of God doesn't change with our circumstances. So let us hold fast to the confession of our hope. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus as our example who endured the cross. You're probably not going to face a challenge that great. Let us not grow weary and lose heart because we look to Jesus. He is the object of our faith. He is the one in whom we trust. He's the one we believe in.